Hello and welcome to Spinster's Library. I'm Claudia and today I want to talk about the genres dystopian fiction and post-apocalyptic fiction, and I want to talk about their similarities and differences. I'm going to be doing all of this with regards to dystopian and post-apocalyptic classics of the 20th century, although today I'm also going to be discussing some 19th century post-apocalyptic and dystopian fiction. The two terms are often used interchangeably, and that is possibly because there is a lot of crossover between them, and also possibly because there doesn't seem to be a set definition. So I'm not speaking with any kind of authority here. I am just telling you what I personally consider post-apocalyptic and what I personally consider dystopian, and what I think are the hallmarks of each of these genres. I also want to guide you towards a video by an author named Jim Heskett, which I looked at in preparation for this video, and that is linked in the description box down below. And he defines dystopian fiction and post-apocalyptic fiction by the tropes used within those works of fiction. For example, he says that dystopian fiction is often futuristic, technological, and has a political element, like a government that needs to be overthrown. And he defines post-apocalyptic novels by more the drive towards survival, a war-torn setting, and the idea of taking control of your own life. In his video, he says that dystopia is about a bad future that needs to be corrected, whereas post-apocalyptic fiction is about a bad future that needs to be survived. Talking from my own experience, not as an author but as a reader, I often see dystopian fiction as something that is set within a set and organized and functioning system. Something that is rather different from the world that we live in, but something that is essentially recognizable as normal. Often the events of the past, including but not limited to apocalyptic events, have been overcome and a new political system has been established. Usually these political systems are kind of recognizable ideas from the time in which the author wrote the specific book, but that have then been taken to the extremes. For example, the world of George Orwell's 1984 is clearly based on political ideologies, both of the German Nazis, but also of the Soviet communists. So an author starts off with a real political ideology and then speculates about what could happen if that ideology is taken to its extremes. Sometimes a dystopian novel will be set around a specific idea, theme, or concept. For example, the concept of human infertility is a deciding factor in the dystopian worlds both of Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale and of P.D. James' The Children of Men, although both authors then take that idea into a different direction. In apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic fiction, on the other hand, the events that disrupt daily life are either currently occurring or have only just occurred, and they are hugely disruptive events. Zombies, aliens, nuclear war, global pandemics. These stories deal with how humans cope and survive as society is suddenly dismantled, disrupted, and destroyed around them. Post-apocalyptic fiction shows humans at war with their surroundings. Usually the apocalypse leads to a rebuilding of society in the end, and that society then may or may not turn into a dystopia. Of course, there are variations on this theme. One very interesting example, and this is where we are leaving our confines of the 20th century and we go back all the way to 1826 when Mary Shelley's The Last Man was published. And in this novel, the character only very slowly lose their sense of normalcy. Societal structures don't just disappear with a bang, but more unnoticed, more gradual. The characters go from living within a world that is recognizable to a reader from 1826 to something that is completely unknown. With post-apocalyptic and dystopian fiction, I often see the two on a continuous timeline. So many dystopian worlds in 20th century dystopian fiction only emerge after a apocalyptic event happened in the past of that story. And that could be anything that was worrying people at the time: climate change, wars, other society disrupting events that make it possible for a dystopian regime to form and to take control of the population in the wake of that apocalyptic event. Some novels mention that there was an apocalyptic event but don't quite specify it. And some novels don't mention any apocalyptic event, and there is no real backstory to how the society came to be the way it is. The struggle of the main characters is different in dystopian and in post-apocalyptic fiction. In post-apocalyptic stories, you often see a struggle for survival, whereas in dystopian stories, you often see a struggle for freedom and power and control of your own life. One common theme that I've noticed between the two genres is the destructive power of nature. In post-apocalyptic fiction, the decline of human civilization is often depicted through the metaphor of nature reclaiming the world, reclaiming man-made structures. You imagine walking through a post-apocalyptic landscape and you see cars that have been overgrown and rusty. You see roads that have been reclaimed by plants and animals. Homes get destroyed and infrastructure disappears, and humans lose their place at the top of the food chain in post-apocalyptic fiction. We see something like that in Mary Shelley's The Last Man, where the main characters wander through London and other European cities and everything is overgrown and there are just cows walking the streets and the animals have taken the place of humans within these societies, and suddenly all of the structures, everything that we consider eternal, is suddenly falling apart. In The Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham, it is quite literally plants that become the biggest danger to humans in a complete reversal of what we consider the natural order of the world. In dystopian fiction, on the other hand, it is usually the humans, the regime, that have suppressed nature and pushed it to the outside of society. Dystopian worlds are often portrayed as urban environments, cityscapes, where human architecture and human infrastructure has driven the natural world away. And nature in dystopia is often used as a symbol for freedom. Notably, for example, in George Orwell's 1984, where the main character's discovery of the natural landscape of the south of England goes hand in hand with his sexual liberation, and this idea of sex as something that the regime is against and nature as something that the regime is against kind of combine. I have tried to list the differences between the two genres and some of the similarities, but often the two genres just merge, and there are books where I can't strictly place them in one category or the other. And one that I want to mention here is The Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler, which is set really in a post-apocalyptic world because society has fallen apart and there is no rule of law and it is all about survival. But on the other hand, within that chaos, humans have grouped together and founded their own little societies, and those could be described as dystopian. So that is one of the novels where the two genres and the two worlds collide very beautifully and are wonderfully merged. And I can't really say which is my favourite, if I prefer dystopian or post-apocalyptic fiction. The two genres have different feels a lot of the time. Post-apocalyptic fiction tends to be more fast-paced, action-packed, gripping, and dystopian fiction sometimes tends to be more thoughtful and intellectual and theoretical. But that isn't always the case, and I think a good novel in either genre combines the two approaches and has aspects of both. So I would like to know from you how you define those terms for yourself, if you've ever thought about the distinction between post-apocalyptic and dystopian. And if you have a preference for the two, then let me know that as well. Thank you for watching. Bye!